Maybe if you stole a book too. Before the cops come and arrest you for shoplifting. Welcome. I am Mike, and you caught Reading with One Mundane Man. It is cold in Ohio today, which is why I am plugging on the hat, the sweater. I mean, I could turn up the heat, but I'm a bit of a Scrooge with that. I'm a less coal on the fire kind of person. So today I wanted to discuss the book series or book that got me into reading. If you remember from last video, that was question number 5. What book got you into reading or book series? And so without further ado, book number 1, Princess and the Pea. And I remember reading that book to my mom. I read it out loud to her. I think there was a pea that was under her mattress and it was uncomfortable for her, and they piled a bunch of other mattresses and then she was way up high. That's really all I remember. What I remember was the sense of completing it, that accomplishment, that moment of just some understanding that I went somewhere. So book number 1 was The Princess and the Pea. That got me into reading. I'm going to skip book 2 from Princess and the Pea to my third book. I was about 12. I saw a movie preview for the movie The Shining with Jack Nicholson. I remember it because I thought that movie looked spooky. That summer break, then my dad and my mom and we went to Lawson's, which I'm not sure if Lawson's is still a thing anymore. Lawson's was like a convenience store that we have today without the gas pumps. My dad, who never met a stranger, was talking and talking. And while he was talking, I of course I went in with him. My mom stayed out in the car. And I looked at the magazines. And the next thing that caught my attention was this little spinner of books. Kind of like what you see maybe in a library, or a thrift store. Just random books stuffed on this little spinner. And I was spinning it. But there was one book that had this super bright, shiny yellow cover. And that one kept catching my eye as it was spinning. And so finally I stopped on it. And there, like a beacon, was the book, The Shining. I grabbed that son of a gun off the shelf. I opened it up. It had, 16 pages of movie stills in there from the movie, the preview that I saw a few months ahead. I had no idea this was a book written by Stephen King, as I pronounced his name back then. I grabbed this book and I bolt out the front door of the store. Ran to my mom, who was sitting on the passenger side in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette. You could see the smoke billowing out the windows. I knew it was her. So anyways, I wave the smoke away. Like, my gosh, Mom, look what I found. And I stuff it in the window at her. And she looks at me and she says, Michael, get that book back in the store where you found it before the cops come and arrest you for shoplifting. Well, that wasn't the response I was hoping for, but she had a point. I did run out of that store with the book, and then now my elation turned into fear, and I sneak this book, and I put the book back on the rack, and I spin it, and I go stand up by Dad, and, are you ready? Mom's ready to go. We should probably get, before the heat get here, before the coppers show up. at some point, I don't remember when, if it was that day, if it was the next day, I don't know. But my dad brought the book home. He bought the book for me, found the book, stole the book. I don't know. He acquired the book. The Shining by Stephen King, which I eventually learned was not the right pronunciation. See, because you're taught in school, when you're learning to read The Princess and the Pea or whatever, that the PH is the soft F sound, not the hard V sound. That's the V. But anyways, eventually I've learned that Stephen King, obviously. And I never made that mistake again. But I had that problem with names my whole life. I was very much a person who, I pronounced your name the way it was spelled. In high school, there was a kid who I went to school with. His name was spelled S-E-A-N. I kept saying, that's Scene. I never heard that name before. That's weird. Lo and behold, his name is pronounced Sean, which made no sense to me then, and still makes no sense to me that how S-E-A-N is Sean, but his name and Stephen King's spelling for a little bit too. So anyways, I get this book and I start reading it. Now I'm 12. This is a very adult book. I think the first line is something about an officious little prick, and that caught my attention. This guy talks like my dad. So I was hooked from that book, from that opening line. And you find out with Stephen King that character development is so vital to his storytelling. A setting is so vital. And as a 12-year-old reading this book, some parts of it got really long and drawn out. It was summer, so I was playing a lot of stuff outside. But then came Christmas break, and I made it a goal. I was, 100 pages away from finishing the book. And so I got in there and I finished it, this, of elation. But just a matter of, I felt the cold, even in the summer when I was reading this thing, or the fall, I felt the cold of the Overlook Hotel of Colorado. I was scared. That's one of the few books that kind of creeped me out reading it. Especially the lady in what was it, room 214? Don't go into room 214, or I think that's what the room number was. That had a lasting image with me. But that book creeped the heck out of me, and then I went on a Stephen King binge. I read a bunch of his stuff. I haven't read much lately, but that was the book that introduced me to my first favorite genre and my first favorite author. And then the book that probably set me on that path of reading more than any other book came in the fall of '77. So anybody who is a science fiction fan knows Star Wars was released in 1977. My parents took us, my brother and I, to the drive-in, which was the best way to watch movies as a kid. It was just so cool. From the very beginning, that the opening symphony, almost like Beethoven's Fifth, that just hit me in that car with the mono speaker cranked up, crackling in the window, and the scroll, and then you saw the destroyer go by. And anybody who has watched this movie prior to CGI today had to have been just in awe of the size of this ship. And that Star Destroyer, man, it evoked a sense of immensity and doom that very few movies have done to me. But that movie not only spurred my love for movies, which I love almost as much as books, but not as much. I don't think I gain as much from movies as I do from reading. But summer gives way to fall. I go back to school, and it was Scholastic when I was in school. So she passed them out. My fourth grade teacher passed them out, Mrs. Stanley, who, by the way, still alive, and we still have conversation. She got me a Christmas card this Christmas. So how cool is that? I mean, I don't know if many of my teachers are still alive. I'm an old geezer, but she is, and she's doing very well. Anyway, she passed out the Scholastic Reader and our Scholastic book ordering. And I always leaf through it, and I'm sure I picked books, as I said, but in there was Star Wars, the movie tie-in. It had the picture of, it was the blue cover, I believe, and I don't have this book anymore. I still have The Shining that I stole or borrowed or whatever I did with it. I still have that. I think it's on my son's bookshelf. But this one, I don't have this book anymore. But if I remember right, it had a blue cover, and Han and Luke and Leia and Obi-Wan and Vader were all on the cover. And I couldn't wait to get home. I ran in, I slammed this thing down. I felt like Ralphie from the Christmas Story with the BB gun, the official Red Ryder, blah, blah, blah. I slammed this thing down, and I'm like, boom, this is the book I want. I'm not, I wasn't stealing that, so I don't know, what books were in the stores, but this thing was in the Scholastic newsletter. So what you did, you filled out the order form, you put the money in the order form in an envelope, and you took it back and handed it to the teacher. And this was before the days of credit cards and such. And then you waited 6 to 8 weeks for this crappy thing to come back. And there I saw the Scholastic books. I knew Star Wars Episode 4, although I had no idea it was Episode 4 at the time, was in there. And I started reading it. And I read every word of it. And I think this was the book. My parents, lights out. We went to bed at 9 o'clock. But sometimes, if you're reading, if you're doing something educational, they would allow us to leave our lights on, for 30 minutes, but then lights out, by golly. And when lights out, by golly, happened, lights were out. So I thought, I got this flashlight, that's just hanging out somewhere in my bedroom. So I grabbed it. I built like this little tent thing over my head, and I put some pillows out so the blankets, weren't, it wasn't a sheet, wasn't a ghost. And I had my flashlight on, thinking no one, if my parents walked by going to the bathroom where they checked on us before they went to bed, I was so well hidden. They would not see the glare of the flashlight through the blanket. They wouldn't even notice that I'm sitting up in bed, that this blanket's on me, this Harry Potter invisibility cloak was on me, and no one would see me. Sure as heck, my dad would walk by. Michael, what are you doing? Nothing. Reading. And he's like, okay, lights off, it's time for bed. And then you hear them, especially on the weekend, you hear them going to bed, you hear their bedroom door shut, and then boom, flashlight out. Well, the worst thing about a flashlight, reading light, is that when the batteries start to die and the pages start to turn yellow, it's not that crisp white anymore, and you bang it to get the damn lights back up. But anyways, I read this story. And I don't remember how long it took, but I was just fascinated by it. And that, The Princess and the Pea took me somewhere. The Shining, I felt that one to my core. But Star Wars, I knew how the story began. I knew how it ended, at least this episode. And reading it just fascinated the crap out of me. We didn't have VCRs back then. We didn't have ways to record or to buy these movies to rewatch. So books became the way that I relived these moments that I loved. And those moments were the cantina scene, or Mos Eisley scene with Han Solo. You meet Chewbacca and Han. Luke gets harassed, heckled. Obi-Wan has to chop off someone's arm. and then they got to get the heck out of Dodge because the heat was coming, much like the heat was coming for me a handful of years later when I wanted to show my mom a book. The opening scene with the Star Destroyer, I don't know that words captured the visual of it, but I saw the visual already, and I knew what happened, and I knew that ship, and they talk about just the size of it. I knew what was happening with that, and that was, like I said, that was the way, and I would dog ear my favorite parts, so I could go back and reread it. So Star Wars was the book that still to this day, I just read the original trilogy again in December. But my goal is I don't know if I'll read all the books in the Star Wars universe. Lucas's canon or Disney's canon. I don't know if I'll read them all because it's quite an extensive universe now if you throw in graphic novels and young readers and the adult books and all. But that is still something from that day, from that summer day, and then that fall day when I got the book, that summer day when I saw the movie, and that fall day when I got the book. Those are things that shaped my life for reading and for movies. And I am eternally grateful for that, and that I had parents who was willing to make that reading an important part, or to make reading an important part in one young kid's life. My mom read books. I think that's where I got it from. My dad did not read books. My mom read. She always read. It seemed like she was always reading Gone with the Wind. I think every year. It's a mammoth book. I've never read it. I probably should, just so I can tell her, hey, I read the book, but it's big. But it started there, and she always had a bookshelf, at her house, in our house, and I would always go through the books and look at the pages and try to read the words that I could, even if I didn't understand what the book was. She had one that was Valley of the Dolls, and I tried reading that. Not that I was intrigued by it, but it had a really cool cover. It had like a doll hanging or a doll face beat up, and I thought, ooh, that's creepy. So maybe I was predestined to find Stephen King years later. And, the books were just too complicated and not books that an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old should be digesting anyway, from what I hear. Those 3 books with those 3 events put me on the path to reading and has kept me there. So it was The Princess and the Pea, Star Wars, and The Shining. But those were the 3 books that shaped who I am as a reader today. So that's question 5 that I failed to answer yesterday in the last video, and then I promised I would make that a separate video because I already had the idea for it. So hey, thank you for listening. And if you want to share your story on how you first got into reading, or your favorite book that got you going, or even your story similar to, maybe if you stole a book too out of excitement, let me know in the comments. We'll have a discussion about those things. Reading is a way of life. It's some people mark lives by events and places and people. I seem to have marked mine by books I've read and movies that I've seen. So again, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I will see you all again real soon. Bye.